Hey everyone, and welcome to the Unmodern podcast, the podcast where we have unscripted, unapologetic, and uncomfortable conversations that affects everyday people. If you've ever had an outlook, thought, or an opinion that modern day society told you to be silent on, that you would get in trouble for, or if you've ever heard the words, probably shouldn't say that, then this is the podcast for you. My name is Alfred, a husband, father, and an adventure-seeking kind of guy who over the years has learned to have a positive outlook on life, regardless of what society throws at me. So if you're ready to listen, let's go. Welcome, Ray.
It's so good to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited. This is really good. I feel like we've kind of done unofficial podcasts for years, ever since we met, past 9 years ago, actually. I know when we met, and we can certainly dive into that a little bit more. Thank you so much for being here. I'm super appreciative. And I know it was short notice. It's kind of something that was born out of about a 48-hour window, which was fantastic. So yeah, I love that.
Well, I want to start by congratulating you. I love your studio. I think it's really, really great. I can see you in the sphere. I can see you doing this, which is really, really cool. And of course, I jumped on the opportunity. So
yeah, no, I appreciate it, dude. It's awesome. It's definitely been a passion project and a thought process of mine for a while. And then having a supportive wife that lets me do it. I usually take on too much as it is, but this is something that I like. It's at home. It's easy. It can be either in person or digital online, right? Which is fantastic as well.
Yeah.
And then you obviously know me over the years, very opinionated. We align on a lot of things. Yeah. And there's some stuff that we're going to dive in this episode here. We met actually through small business as well, through commerce. And that's actually where I want to dive in the most today. I think that anybody who's listening to this is going to get the highest value. Is it such a grassroots thing? Society's so polarized nowadays with, I want to be a multimillionaire drop shipper and I want to earn as much money as I can without putting in as much effort. And you've done it from the bottom up in a small rural community. You don't need to live in Toronto or Edmonton to make a name for yourself and call yourself an entrepreneur in a business. You know, the word entrepreneur is so bastardized these days because it really is only those online presence. And you even have comedians online making fun of the word entrepreneur because people don't really understand what it means.
Yeah.
They think that you can buy a course and call yourself an entrepreneur. You can buy into Tupperware and be like, I'm a business owner. They really have no idea. They really don't, right? And starting from the bottom and working your way up is really a story that I want to dive into today, because I feel like you're probably one of the best representations of that I'm aware of in person. So yeah, and then there's some other things on here, and you've touched on so much. You're a director of the Chamber of Commerce. Is that still the case?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, fantastic. And then you're a consultant for Bow Valley Power Distribution.
Yeah, that's a funny story. We'll get into that.
I'm excited for that. So, I mean, the list goes on and on. You're also a man of faith, and I absolutely love that. And that's actually something that when we first met, I was a little bit put off, and I'm going to touch on it here a little bit later about a quote that you're not really a quote, but a statement that you made about faith and how you are really so rooted in that. Mm-hmm. And I actually have it written down here in my notes. What I would likely title this episode is Confident in Your Convictions.
Okay.
And that's really a reference to the Bible and a reference to your faith and really how you're so rooted in it, where people can challenge your status quo. And it's something that actually rises you up to want to talk about it rather than push you down.
Right.
And I feel like that's really a metaphor for any position anybody holds in life. But yours being in faith, I really want to expand on that. So there's lots of other stuff on here, man, but I want to open the floor to you. Any statements you want to make and any sort of intros beyond that, anything with your wife and your daughter, anything you want to really touch on?
First of all, those are very kind words. Very, very nice intro. I really, really like that. And I love adventure. You know, I'm an adventurer and I love really navigating the landscape of opportunity. I think that's really important. And as I grow in that skill set, right, that muscle, you get to see that opportunity kind of everywhere and to kind of focus your energy and stuff like that. So, and the faith component too, I think is important because I don't hide that, but I also don't push that on other people. And for me, it is kind of who I am and forges who I am. It gives me direction. It's my compass and a foundation for sure. I am married to a beautiful woman named Melanie. She's an East Coaster. She's great. And you'd mentioned, Courtney, being your kind of support in this. I wouldn't be able to be where I am now if I didn't have that support either, which is really, really important. And I have a beautiful 20-year-old daughter who just finished hairstyling school in Winnipeg. So she's out there kind of finding her own path, which is really exciting.
That's awesome, man. I love that. And yeah, I've met Mel on multiple occasions. She was actually, I believe, there the first night we met.
First night we met.
Yeah,
what
I
a
remember,
great
yeah.
party. It was so good.
So I'm going to expand on that a little bit. So we met at a lake lot of a mutual friend of ours, and Mel was there, and we were both getting into this brand new water sports business, very modern at the time. People had no idea what it was, but it was something that attracted us. I think you were there more for the business aspect of it.
We've been around for about 3 years because I met her 7 years ago. And I've been doing it for about 9-10 years. So we'd already kind of been somewhat established, but it was new waters for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we met at this lake lot, and we were both getting into the same business. And like I said, I think you were there for more of the commerce aspect of it, because the business was.
I was there for the drinks.
Well, that too. Yeah, no doubt. And it was amazing because we aligned very quickly. We were very different in the sense of, you were a man of faith. And at the time, I would honestly consider myself probably anti-faith at that point. I was a relatively immature. I was in my mid to late 20s. And for me, it was a great moment for me to meet somebody of maturity that was getting into the same space. I really felt flyboarding was a sport that was very counterculture, which aligned with me very perfectly because I've always been a counterculture guy.
Right.
Hence the name of the podcast.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. And it was great because when Mel was there, we immediately clicked on the commerce aspect of it. We immediately started talking about collaborating, and we started talking about the business aspect of it, and the fact that you were so far north, but there was opportunity. You were able to see it where anybody who didn't really have an open mind would have a hard time seeing that.
Right.
It was pretty fantastic. And then relatively quickly, you started talking about your faith, and I believe you were a part-time pastor at that time.
I was engaged in seminary studies through various parts of academia. I was working on staff at a local church and doing some ministering at churches in Bonnyville and around. And I was running the men's ministry at Four Wing Cold Lake. I felt a calling to certain aspects in our community, namely youth. I've always been involved with youth. I was a big brother. I worked at the youth center. I was on the Military Family Resource Center board of directors, and developed a program called BAD, Boys Affected by Deployment, especially during the Afghanistan conflict, in which a lot of these kids, one of their parents or both their parents were in a combat or in a conflicted area for quite some time. So I saw a calling towards that about how do we engage the youth with one or both their parents away in a way that encourages their growth into maturity. And so that was a big part. So yeah, I was doing a lot of stuff in that area for sure at that time.
Yeah, it was amazing. And I can't remember exactly the details of how the conversation started, but I remember you mentioning that you were a man of faith and very rooted in that in all aspects of your life. That really was your overarching kind of structure that really dictated how you basically ran your life and how you appreciated life. Mm-hmm. And that was something I noticed indirectly right away. I noticed the charisma. I noticed the joking.
Yeah.
I noticed the passion for it. And it was just a fantastic time. But I remember very specifically a moment, I don't remember the exact words, I'm obviously going to paraphrase here. We were talking about faith and belief in God and belief in the afterlife. And you had mentioned something about how when somebody dies, if you weigh them, they weigh a little bit less.
That energy has mass. And there's been studies,
yes.
There's been studies in that. I think biblically speaking and culturally speaking, we use different words, but the same language. So like, when we talk that we're made up of energy, which is scientifically accurate, and the Bible speaks of a spirit, or that God breathed his spirit into each person, there's a correlation there to me, right? So yeah, I don't think there's a conflict, for me anyway, between science and God. And even from a probability perspective, if God exists and science we know exists, well, then God would have had to create it. But I think human beings, I believe that every human being is spiritual in some way because we serve something. So you think quickly of like the polytheistic, far off Greek religion, where there are gods made for the vices of man, whether it be lust or wrath or these vices that humans have made into gods that we serve. I think all people serve something, and some people serve family, some people serve their company, and some people overserve. And what I mean is they become fanatical in their beliefs. And we see that. We see that with so many different ideologies in our culture today, where people are evangelical in non-Christian ideas and ideologies. And I think that comes from the heart of who we are as a spiritual being, that we want to serve something. And so for me, I'm on a journey of truth and trying to find out what is true and to consult my creator in what I should be doing with my time. And that's important to me. And I've failed many times at that. Right? And my failure, though, has been, I think, oftentimes a great strength. So
I think that's what makes us human, right?
Yeah,
is our
for sure.
failures, is because we're imperfect,
Yeah.
right? And we have to serve a bigger image. I'm certainly not a man of committed faith, but over the years, I found myself more rooted in a bigger structure, something bigger than me, serving a purpose,
Right.
and believing in something like that. And I would say when we first met, my criticism or my really immature approach to your stance and not being open-minded was I would chalk it up to attitude reflecting leadership.
Right.
Is we can talk about government and stuff there later. But I feel the church has suffered and all religions have suffered because of piss poor leadership.
100%.
Because you are now the image of that. So you become this person that everybody wants to model, or everyone's going to criticize your action or inaction. And that's something as well that I think all faiths have really faltered. And especially in today's society, is we've allowed a lot of things to just go. It's kind of just let it be. It's fine. It's no big deal. And you become unrooted. You're not as fixated. You're not that pillar of structure and stance, and everyone just wants to fit in and kind of appease everyone to a degree. And that's never going to be the case. So why are we compromising our values and our structures? And that was something that at the time I really had a hard time with.
Right.
There was a lot of stuff around. There was movies about priests back in the day. I know my family and my wife's family, we both come from a small town in Nova Scotia. And there was really bad stuff with priests back then. And not only that, nuns, same thing.
Yes.
Like the representatives of this structure really did not do a great job.
No, we look at even right now, the topic of residential schools and so forth. And what I focus on that is I really focus on man and not God. And I have probably a different view of Christianity than most people have. I don't think Jesus was a fan of religion. And there's an argument to be made that religious leaders murdered him for it. I have a saying that I've never met somebody God wasn't crazy in love with. And regardless of other people's ideologies, beliefs, philosophies, I try to have empathy and understand people. I try to understand why maybe they make the decision they have, or who they are and where they've been, and not cast judgment. That's ultimately how I try to navigate my life. I keep religion and politics out of business for me, because for me, my customer is important, and is themselves as a person and who they are is more important than what they believe, because our beliefs shape and change all the time. But as their value as a human being doesn't, right? So I've always tried to keep those things kind of separate. And I've had some conflict. I've had conflict on boards where boards want to push a political agenda from a business perspective. And I said, well, I don't want to do that, right? I want to value all my customers. And for renting out paddle boards, I care about their time on the paddleboard, not who they voted for, right? But sometimes businesses get caught up, and in the divisiveness that we have in our culture now, it seems that everything is political and that we need to take a side on everything instead of trying to truly understand people, right?
Yeah, there was something you said there that I want to unpack a little bit, where you said people's beliefs and even to a degree their values change. Isn't that such a crazy idea in today's society? Because in a debate, you're going to argue there's a winner and a loser. On social media comment boards, there's a winner or a loser.
Yeah.
And people's main objective, it seems, underlying, they may not state it out loud, but their goal is to alter your mind.
Right.
And then it's almost like an I gotcha moment.
Right.
But if that's your goal, then why are you considering yourself superior? Or why did you consider yourself a winner or a loser in a conversation when almost all societal conversations are not winners and losers?
Correct.
We're strictly just having a conversation. And if you can boil it down to a much bigger purpose of people's value as people,
yes,
rather than what they say or what they believe in, it's just your value as a human. It's just there. And your faith in God would actually reinforce that, because it's so much bigger than that.
Yeah. And for me, I view myself as one of God's messed up kids, right? I really look through a lens of me raising my daughter, where when I first had my daughter and she could walk and we'd walk through the mall, she'd hold my hand. And as she grew in her maturity and trust in me, she would walk a few feet ahead, and then eventually she walked on her own. And that's been my spiritual journey for sure. And when you talk about binary, and I could quote this wrong, so I hope the listeners and viewers don't come too hard, but I believe Socrates said that the purpose of argument wasn't to win, but in the search for truth. And I think we have become polarized with the aim at winning instead of growing. And for me, two words that I use all the time that are so important to me is growth and trajectory. And the only way to have growth and trajectory is in that trajectory to grow to where you are, is to have the humility to realize that you don't know everything, and to take a position that you're going to learn something from somebody, even if you disagree with them. But you have to go into that with that mindset, right?
Yeah, I love the quote by Socrates. I can't confirm or deny if that's accurate.
Yeah.
But if we're going to start quoting,
The unexamined life is not worth living. That I do know is from him. So
yeah, I mean, we can even chalk it up to, old school language here. People get caught up in their hubris, right? They really do. It's
true.
We can quote old school ancient beings like the Stoics and stuff.
Stoicism's coming back too.
And I think what's happening is we're combating modern issues with unmodern, a little bit of a plug there for the title of the podcast, but we're using unmodern approaches and we're getting back to things that just work. They survive the sands of time.
Do you think there's an elitism in today's society I just find that everybody thinks that and there's a lot to be said that we live in a great time. Okay. Like I wouldn't want to live 200 years ago. Let's be serious. But there's some things I think that we know better. And when you see the destruction of the family, right? Or when you see teen suicide or anxiety at the levels that they are now, that's very telling. I mean, we didn't have suicide when I was a kid. It was very rare, right? Now, obviously technology, there's so many different variables connected to that. But I think you're right. I think there's something in looking to our past and the grassroots philosophical ideas and nature of humans. That is so much that we can take time to examine.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. Yeah. And I don't know if I'd use the word elitism because I think it brings too much of a structural component to it. I think it boils down to the very basics of we've lost our humanity. We really have, whether it's through politics, whether it's through money, technology, whatever it may be. Countries that call themselves first world are the ones that have the first world problems. Right. There's a quote by 50 Cent where he was on a podcast and he said, I think depression is a luxury. And he talked about it where he said, you go to other countries or you go to places that he grew up in the ghetto and depression wasn't a thing because you don't have time to worry about it.
And you make a great point, which is about time. And I've talked to a lot of people about this, about making an idol out of comfort, which is our culture has definitely done that. And for me, the greatest advancements I've ever made as a person is through discomfort. And I try to not be comfortable. I remember a funny story is a good friend of mine asked me to be the master ceremonies for Diwali night in Cold Lake. And I said, I can't do that. Like, I'm not part of that culture. And he's like, oh, you'd be great at it. And I turned it down the first year. And the second year he asked me to do it, I was like, I'm all in. Right. And I did it and it was exciting. And yeah, it went really, really well. So now I really try to, I love Ryan Serhant. He's a real estate agent in New York, about taking advantage of those uncomfortable opportunities. And so I really try to reside in those areas sometimes and just to see what happens. And like this.
Right? Yeah, 100%.
Like this, 100%.
I think the power of being a yes man is incredible. There's no way that you can say yes to opportunities and you're going to strike out 100% of the time. It's never going to happen. There's going to be something that you throw against the wall that sticks.
Yeah.
And today's society is so individualized. And that's the word I use, where you look at any of the modern countries that consider themselves top dog, Canada, Great Britain, the US. It's so funny because that's where all of these, what they consider societal problems exist. But then you go to these other countries that people would call third world. Like I just came back from Costa Rica in April, and part of the retreat that I went on, and I can unpack that later, is we did a soccer game with some underprivileged kids as young as I think 8 or 9 and as old as 15, 16. And a couple of these kids didn't even have shoes.
Right.
And yet they didn't understand the word depression. The issues they were dealing with was survival.
Right.
Things like gender roles, that's not vocabulary in their minds. And in our first world society, they would consider them backwards because the man had a structured duty and the woman had a structured duty. Obviously, there's exceptions to the rule. And there was obviously some systemic issues down there about abusive fathers and stuff. And I think what that comes from is that comes from a lack of abundance. That comes from desperation. Is the majority of the community, though, came together, and something like, I think it was every Saturday night in the small town that we were in, there was a communal beach cleanup. The kids would play with each other. The adults would clean up after the tourists that left the place in shambles because this was their community.
Right.
And I remember growing up too, we didn't rely on governments or structures. Yeah. If it wasn't the church handling it, it was the Rotary Club. It was the Kinsmen clubs. It was these thankless men and women that stepped up, where the women would be in a kitchen feeding everybody and the men would be helping rebuild something or build something of new. And it was never a matter of compensation. It was never a matter of wasted time or how can I grow this? It was strictly being present.
Right.
And that, I feel, is what's missing.
Yes.
In a lot of stuff. And we can overarch it and put it to society, but even boil it down to the house. You have moms that feel like they have to go into the workforce because things are so expensive, rather than having contentment in your situation and maybe just pulling back the reins a little bit on your life and not having to keep up with the Joneses.
100%.
And the fulfillment a person would get out of that, when you can swallow that ego that society says you have to have because you're being put down by an entity they can't even fucking define. It makes no sense.
Yeah.
And that's why I feel so blessed to have the situation I'm in, where I have a very driven and motivated wife. But at the same time, it's a situation where she can be home all day doing house chores. And I heard a term the other day, trad wife. And I was
what's
like,
that mean?
It's traditional wife.
Oh, okay.
Whereas me, like, oh, you're a traditional woman. That's fantastic. Where now it's being used as an insult.
Right.
To tell women like, oh, you're not meeting your potential. It's like, well, what is your potential? Because going back to what we started this conversation on, when you value humans to just be valued as human beings, not value them on what they do, their income, these first world trophies that if you don't have enough of them in the trophy case, you're not considered part of a club, or you're not considered.
I get asked a lot of time advice on different things, and I always default to it. There isn't always one way. And you hear criticisms of people, the way they rear their children, or people that have couples Facebook accounts, or people that have separate bank accounts or together bank accounts. And for me, I've always believed the most important thing is communication with your partner, and for what works for you to grow and to continue to have trajectory and growth. With that means that don't care what other people think, what works for you. Because the people that judge all the time and they're like, this is how you should do it. It's one thing to give your anecdotal experience out of love to somebody, right? As entrepreneurs, we're very giving in our failures to other entrepreneurs. It seems to be a common trait and a common thread, but that's out of love and not out of criticism and a negative place. But I don't believe there's always one way. And so if somebody says, you know what, I do want to stay home, or I do want to do this, we should be celebrating that. Because if that's a choice that family unit is made, that they believe will be for their betterment, who are we to say that our path is their path? But we have become so polarized, which is unfortunate. And we need to get back, I think, to some of those traditional ideas of individualism away from government. And we do have, and you touch on this too, there seems to be a big divide between urban and rural areas in Canada right now. And you see that on the political spectrum for sure. But the idea that we actually have a voice in our community, and we shouldn't always be looking to systems and politicians and government to solve whatever areas are affecting our community. Cold Lake, I'll give you an example. We had something, I won't get into the details too much because I don't want to get too polarized, but we had a conflict in our community that came about, and we had somebody who's a politician in our community talk about feeling unsafe in our community and was pushing, I think, a very divisive kind of agenda. And it upset me because we had a fire recently where 3 houses went down and 3 competing real estate companies came together to put on a beautiful barbecue to raise money. And I was there and people were buying $100 hot dogs. And at no point did I hear anybody talk about the political beliefs, the gender ideology, these divisive issues that have come to the forefront. They just wanted to buy a hot dog and help that family. And I've seen that in communities where we've seen our best in these times of trials and tribulations that I think are important to remember in those human moments. Mel and I just finished being judges for Lemonade Day, where the kids in our community go to Lemon University and they learn about entrepreneurship and how to shake hands and look somebody now when you talk to them. And then you go out, nobody there cares who you voted for. Nobody's talking about that. But when you turn on the news, there's a great saying. It says, if you don't watch the news, you're not informed. And when you watch the news, you're misinformed. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's great. It's a great line. And so I think I do watch various news sources, but I also engage in my community. And when I engage my community, I get a real good feel of truth. So yeah, I think we need to remember how powerful our voice and our actions in our community are to solve some of the systemic issues that are taking place, both in urban and rural. And remember that. But I think in some ways, considering all of the stuff that's going on, people have somewhat given up. Rightly so. I'm not one to judge. It's hard right now when it comes to rents, inflation, utility bills, and it could be very easy to feel overwhelmed. And I like to try to inspire and motivate people as I like to be inspired and motivated.
Well, I think that's inspiration in and of itself, is continuing to move.
Yeah.
Is never in any situation in your life that you're dealing with significant issues, will the solution be standing still and doing nothing?
Right.
Right. And I think, or I should say, I know that getting involved, getting moving, keeping busy is the secret to solving your problems. You might not even solve them directly, but indirectly, you're likely going to solve it. And I think that's where politics specifically has really faltered in this country and in mainstream countries, is they've made it so it disincentivizes you to get involved.
I would agree with that.
It's become this club where you're either in or you're out. regardless of who you are.
Yeah.
And I've been a firm believer with all things in life. I think getting involved is the solution. I work in the oil and gas industry. And when the NDP was a political party here in Alberta, there was a few times where we had friends and acquaintances that I had to justify my job because I work in oil and gas, that there was this perception that I was destroying the environment and killing the world and only doing it for profits and all this stuff. And I had to justify my job. And I would phrase it in a way that I told people, listen, I work for an oil and gas company. Who do you think is positioned more to prevent an environmental disaster, me or you? And it's me, because my finger's on the trigger. My hand is on the pulse of that industry. And if I notice something out of place, I have a voice to say something that this isn't right. Mm-hmm. Because if people are going to argue that the world doesn't need oil and gas, well, they're just delusional. They're completely delusional.
And that's like, and again, you justifying is that binary idea of oil bad, me good. Being in the Canadian Armed Forces for 25 years, I'd seen some of that as well. And it comes down to, I think, a lack of information that Canadians have about our resource sector, about our defense sector. I have a bar in Cold Lake, and it's very much military themed. And they see stuff and they're like, well, what's that? And what's that? And they don't understand, oh, there's Northern Sovereignty, NORAD missions up north against Russia, right? Like that's a real thing. You look, the stuff that's going on. I was in during the heat of the Afghanistan conflict, in which Canadians were, I would argue, more engaged. We lost 158 Canadians, right? In that. And I've met Canadians that didn't even know that we had either participated in Afghanistan or that we'd lost people. And part of that is, I would blame the system, but the other part of that is the individual, is to understand where your food comes from, where your energy comes from, where your safety and freedom comes from. I think that's important. And you don't need to know all of those facets, but I think it's important to be informed before you formulate an opinion where you're judging another person about it. And I think that's what's really important. And there's there's far more stuff I don't know than I do know. And some people would conflate my arrogance and confidence together. I'm confident in the things that I know and the experiences that I've had. And I'm not arrogant about the things that I don't know because I simply don't know them. But I'm certainly willing to learn and to hear people's stories.
It takes a lot of humility to admit that, right?
Yeah.
It's a false reward to claim that you know everything and almost put on this facade, right? And everybody wants to say, well, I read the title of a news article, so I know what's going on. We see that all online all the time.
All the time.
People will share an article and they won't even dive into the details.
That's right.
And they'll get it wrong. And then you get these keyboard warriors that think they know it right because they read the article. And it's, again, because you read words, it doesn't make you an expert.
I think the genesis of that, though, in my opinion, is people want to be a hero in their story. And you look at some of the civil rights movements of the 1960s, in which there was actual progress in the rights and equality of people. And I don't mean equity, I mean true equality. And now, and you touched on this earlier about the comfort and things being easy, right? And like you said over there, I make the joke that they don't have these divisive political issues in the third world because, like you mentioned, I mean, they're going to get water, right? And we were talking about municipal taxes with somebody the other day, right? And they were upset at municipal taxes. And I said, I'm fine with municipal taxes. There's lots of taxes I'm not fine with. Yes. Municipal tax is one of them. Because I said, have you given it any thought that you go to your faucet and turn on water and it comes out like
clean water?
Like, yeah, clean. Yeah. And it's like, just take a second and understand. My great grandmother immigrated here from the Ukraine because they were going to be killed and lived in a mud hut in Elphinstone, Manitoba. And I ate with that woman and that was normal. And I turn on a faucet and there's water. And if there's an intruder, I can call somebody and somebody will come with a gun. Now it's not perfect. I'm not saying Canada's perfect. And again, I'm all about growth.
That's progress.
But you have to have some awe. If you take a moment and look at the life that we have and what we have, that's incredible. And I don't think I pay enough taxes municipally for what I have. And please, if you're watching this, please don't raise my taxes. Go away, right? Be responsible. But I'm trying to be funny too, but that's amazing to me. If you sit in the quietness, and we driving up with my business partner today, we talked about the fear of silence in our culture. I live right beside this beautiful campground that I like to say I jog through. I used to jog through it. It's more of a walk now. But coming back, I don't listen to music or podcasts or anything. I listen to nature. I listen to that. And on my boat, for my boat tours, I see people experiencing it through a lens. And I think that there's a fear of reflection, of that quiet space of what we'll find about ourselves. And I truly believe that's a thing. But once you conquer that, man, it's incredible what you can see.
I think society would determine that as a holistic way of doing things.
Yeah, that's fair. As I drink my kombucha.
But it's all that, well, it's not approved by pharmaceutical companies, so it can't have a healing value, or it's not presented in our schools as a way of intellect. So how can you get to know yourself? That's not intelligence. That's just whatever. It's poo-pooed on at times in our society when you do self-reflection, because then you judge people. Everybody has different modalities of healing themselves and becoming more aware and becoming more grateful with their life and perspective. I love that story of your great grandmother, because my daughter, her name is Sophie. She's named after my great grandmother. So that would be her great great grandmother. She lost her husband at a very young age. She had 3 daughters who were my grandmother and then my 2 great aunts. And she lost her husband in the coal mines in Nova Scotia at a very young age. And she never remarried. And my uncle wrote an article when she passed away, and I took it the hardest in the family, because I truly believe that God broke the mold after her, because she was just such a special human. And you got to remember, and the same thing with your grandmother, they grew up in a time that there was no social structures. There was no social safety nets. There was no check that they got from the government to survive. It was survive or die, period.
Yes.
And the story that resonated with me was how she fed her 3 girls in this small home. She used to take 5-gallon pails of potato peelings and sneak out the window at night when the girls were asleep and sell it to farmers so they made their own vodka.
Wow.
And I think she sold it for like 25 cents a pail or something like that. Like something like a number that you can't compute in your brain. You're like,
right.
That's something that you'd see in like a movie documenting the Great Depression.
That's right.
Like, no, that was fucking reality. That was the real deal.
It's crazy.
So why don't you tell me how fucking depressed she was? Why don't you tell me how worried she was about her gender ideology, about being the man and the woman in her life? It didn't fucking cross her mind.
Yes.
It was completely like, so for people to come up to like society or whatever to tell me that needs to be a concern, that's like, if I had to make a list of 100 things that I'm concerned about in my life for myself or my daughter, that doesn't even make the fucking list.
Yes.
It really doesn't. And the fact that anybody else puts it high up on the list to me is ridiculous.
Right.
It makes no sense whatsoever.
Yeah. And I mean, mental illness has become such a politicized word. Right. And everything's mental illness. And I get that. And mental illness is a real thing. And I've struggled with mental illness and depression. For myself, one of the things that I did is I tried to get my house in order. Right. So you've been in my house. Our home is very clean and orderly, which helps me in case I'm engaging in a world that isn't. So I have my fortress of solitude that I kind of come back to, and it keeps me centered. And then charity. Charity was a huge thing for me when it came to my mental health and combating that. Being involved in the community, making sure, this is a tough lesson I learned, and I failed a lot at it, was I'd get involved with these volunteer organizations and I would have a hard time saying no, because they'd be like, oh, Ray, you're so great with the youth on base. You should be a big brother. And then you go to an event with big brothers. You're like, oh, you would be great on this board. And you don't want to say no. And it was a tough lesson where I had to learn that I couldn't save the world. I was doing a disservice to all the organizations by being a part of them. I had to, and for me, prayer was important. So I would go in reflection and I'd pray. I'd be like, where should I be utilized? And learning to say no. And that took quite a while to learn that. It was to my benefit, and it was to the benefit of the organizations that I was involved with. But from a mental illness perspective, helping people and being involved, I remember for 2 years, I felt called to help out at the long-term care facility at the hospital, where I would go and read with seniors that have no family members. Nobody comes and sees them. And so every Sunday I would go in the afternoon, and I brought my daughter, and it was really good to bring my daughter into that because she learned about loss. She'd read to somebody, and then we'd go back the next week and they would be gone. Right. But it wasn't somebody that was like a family member. So it eased her into what we all experience, which is suffering, right, into that world. And then after 2 years, that door closed, and because I was more acute to when I should be engaging, when I should not be engaging, and what I should engage with. But that was, I think, charity. And at the same time, you have to know when it's ready, because I would argue that your house should be in order before you're helping other people, that you shouldn't just go out and just try to save the world. But whether it's helping out at the food bank, I know we hand out Christmas dinners every year, and just being involved in your community to help other people, and not for your, obviously it sounds selfish to be like, well, that helps my mental illness. I didn't join for that. I learned that over a period of time that it was beneficial. And for me, I did it because I was battling depression and I wanted to keep my mind busy. And my mind was busy by helping others. And so it is a balance. I am a centrist even in politics. I think a lot of views have changed political sides, but I am a centrist, and I try to really think on a balanced level of no extremes, the best that I can.
Yeah, no, I love that. I want to unpack the seniors home a little bit, because I actually brought a quote up because I wanted to talk about it. It's rooted in faith, but it actually is very applicable to how you mentioned it. It's from Stephen Colbert. He had an interview with Anderson Cooper. You might have seen it. but I'm just going to paraphrase this a little bit. But Stephen Colbert, to preface this, he has been traditionally liberal for a long time. And I'm noticing with quite a few people that, again, we go back to the unmodern approaches to modern problems, is people are starting to root not necessarily in faith, but in gratitude and in perspective. And so this is a quote by Stephen Colbert, and Anderson Cooper was interviewing him. And Anderson Cooper actually started tearing up. And you're talking about an incredibly left-wing person who does not align with religion of any way, shape, or form, or some sort of deity or entity or spirituality. He started crying in the middle of this interview because it impacted him so much. But Stephen Colbert was quoted saying, "I've learned to love the thing I wish had not happened. What punishments of God are not gifts? It's a gift to exist. With existence comes suffering. There's no escaping that. And if you are grateful for your life, which I believe is a positive thing, you need to be grateful for all of it. You cannot pick and choose what you are grateful for. What do you get from loss? Well, you get awareness of other people's loss, which allows you to connect with that person." Mm-hmm. And it was a very impactful statement. Somebody who traditionally does not show support for that sort of way of living, is there's a higher being. And I think gratitude it goes right back to, you are able to see how grateful you are for something as simple as running water because you have that perspective. You have that experience.
Doing that too also in customer service, and to move in more like an entrepreneurial kind of thing, but tying into that is, I don't think people feel gratitude that they have employment or that they have a customer coming in. I went to go see Oppenheimer, but I had to come see it in Edmonton, right? I want to see it on the biggest screen. I was like, I'm going to have a beer. And I went up to the concession, and the beer was in a cooler, but it was glass. You could see into it. And I could see that. I think they had Coors Banquet come out. And I saw a green can. I said, "Oh, excuse me, what's that green can?" And the person behind there goes, "I don't know." And I said, "Excuse me," right? And he's like, "I don't know what that is." It's like, "Oh," I said, "Was it cider?" Because I said it's green. And I think I see an apple on it. It was kind of far away. He's like, "I have no idea, man." And I said, "Well, can you grab it?" And all I could think about is, I wanted to take this guy out for coffee and say, "Listen, if you suggestive sell things and you're excited to come to work and you're pushing things, you give yourself value as an employee that gives yourself a position when you come up for review to substantiate a pay raise." I'll never forget, my daughter was a young entrepreneur. She's 12 years old, started her first business. She went through the Biz Kids program, which is a community futures program, which is for rural communities. And she started the Icicle Tricycle, where she was selling ice cream, but she started Cadence's Babysitter and Critter Care. And we live in a very transient community, being a military community and oil community. So that opportunity is quite large there. And people want to invest in youth because it makes you feel good, right? To pay the kid that shovels your driveway. And
do that anymore? I don't think
they don't. And that's the point, right? It's crazy. So she's like, "Dad, I got an interview at my dream job, which is the movie theater." And I said, "Oh, so you're getting an interview?" And she said, "Yeah, it's my first interview," because she'd been an entrepreneur. And so I think she was 14 or 15 at the time. I said, "What are you going to tell the manager?" And she says, "Well, I think I'm going to tell them that I really want to work in the concession because I want to suggestive sell putting M&M peanuts in the popcorn because it tastes so good to have that savory and that sweet." I said, "If you tell them that, you're going to get the job." And she's like, "Why?" I said, "Well, I'm not sure, but I feel like every person applying is going to tell the theater manager what their favorite film is, like a Wall-E or whatever." I said, "You're telling them how to increase their profit margins." And she got the job. She never cleaned a bathroom there. They always had her in the concession. And when I went there, the first thing I bought was popcorn with M&M peanuts in it. And I was very proud of her. But that came from, me being an entrepreneur and learning to be an entrepreneur and those programs. And I tell people, like, all the time, invest in your kids. Don't rely on the system or the school, like, take an interest. And I remember I got Caden's Anne Frank when she was like 14 or 15, the same age that Anne Frank was when she wrote it, right? To kind of relate to, look where we are now. And look where she was, that world. So I think it's really, really important. She's just knocking it out of the park. She's got an entrepreneurial spirit now that was forged at a very young age, which will be very beneficial in a world that has customer service like we see, where people, it's almost like in many places I go, I'm a burden to that person's employment. And that's never a good feeling, right? And that's something in our culture that we need to really foster and change, and of that gratitude. Absolutely.
Yeah, I love all aspects of that. I don't think the words profit margin ever came out of her.
Well, that came out of my mouth. It was just her conception.
And that's certainly not a knock on her or anything, but it's such an advanced way of looking at things, because you're really just reframing what exists. Mm-hmm. You're taking the adult perspective of it because you have experience. And I want to kind of go back a little bit here when you talked about keeping your house in order, keeps your life in order. And then the same thing, your daughter shows initiative. There's an old ringing phrase that I firmly believe, it's how you do one thing is how you do everything. Mm. And it really is, every aspect of your life is a representation. There's a quote from a movie, I think it's called The Transporter, where somebody says you can tell the character of a man by how well he keeps his car. And same thing with, like, you can tell the quality of a marriage by how upkept the house is. And I think it just, the overarching statement there is, how you do one thing is how you do everything. Is if you don't apply yourself in a job that you don't necessarily enjoy, you're not going to apply yourself in other aspects of your life that you may enjoy. Maybe a kid likes video gaming, so he's super, super passionate about it. But I can promise you, if you were to be that passionate in all aspects of your life, you would be that much more passionate about what you have passion for.
Yes.
And so you can't have these ebbs and flows with something that's so important as just your personality and your structure and your work ethic. That needs to apply in all aspects. And that's where you see people excel further than everybody. People that wake up at 5 a.m. and don't want to work out, but they work out as if they absolutely love it. They're the ones that go to a job and you're just like, man, how does this guy do it? Or how does that woman wake up with 3 kids and they're all crying? And
Jocko Willink talks about that in Extreme Ownership, right?
Jocko was unbelievable. I love that guy.
Really, really great. But discipline is freedom, right? One of the great things, I mean, in a lot of ways, I would argue the military is the opposite. There's a dichotomy that exists with entrepreneurship. And I might get some flack with this, but again, it's just my opinion. Joining the military at a young age, I found myself feeling like Peter Pan. I left the house at 18. I joined the military. And it was crazy because I bought a car. I bought a 1968 Candy Apple Red Mercury Cougar muscle car to drive. Yeah, it's great. Yeah. And I was like, I'm going to drive to go on my first training, which was in Borden, Ontario. But I'm going to drive through the States, which I've never done, and to go see Jerry Springer, because that was the height of Jerry Springer, right? He had all that. It was just crazy. And so I left and I had my book. Remember those huge books of CDs that you go through? Oh, man. And then maps. Right. And I'd taken a Hilroy paper and I'd written every turn, because this is before the internet. And I went out there, and it's in retrospect where I realized that the military is like Peter Pan, where you don't grow up. You get allowance twice a month. You got a place to live, a roof over your head, 3 meals a day. They lay out what you have to wear, and you need a note to leave the area. And in a way, the organization needs that, because you have to be able to follow orders, especially, I was in the Royal Canadian Air Force, but especially I would argue in the Army, and the fact that it's the only organization in Canada that can order you into your peril, right? So there is an important component to that. But then in my military career, as I transition into an entrepreneur, and I'll speak about that really quick, is we bought a house overlooking the beach and rented out our other property. And that was my first move into the real estate market. And looking out the window, I needed a new roof. It had the worst roof in the world, Alfred. It had like trees growing out of it and everything. And I needed to work, either putting a roof on, I need to do something. And I looked out the window at this beach in which there was nothing there. It's one of the top 25 beaches in Canada now. And I was like, I'm going to rent out paddle boards and use that money to supplement the cost for the roof. And so that's what I did. And that business, over 10 years I've been running it, grew. With the military, there was some conflict there, being an entrepreneur. And I've seen that with other military entrepreneurs as well, where I don't know if it's envy or success or whatnot, and then as an entrepreneur, I started to question things, how things went, even in the military, that authority aspect of, well, that rule doesn't make sense and this doesn't make sense. And my critical thinking skills grew and all of that. And eventually I worked with such amazing bosses. I was so fortunate in my career. They understood that my entrepreneurial spirit, as I was growing in that sphere, they would benefit too from a leadership perspective. And that's ultimately what happened. But there was conflict, and there were things that happened where I would push back and joke around that I'm not a rule follower. And that just means just rules that I question and that just don't make sense. But yeah, the Peter Pan aspect of not growing up and having everything provided to you made me reliant on the organization. And then when I became an entrepreneur, I moved myself in a position where I was no longer reliant. And I think that speaks to kind of everything we've discussed so far in society and culture and things like that, is to move to our place of self-reliance instead of reliance of a system. And Jordan Peterson talks about this, that it's easier to be a slave than to be free, because being free means that you're accountable and responsible. And that's a scary thing. If you are self-reflective and take time to really unpack that and think about it, that's a very scary thing. And I think people say they want to be free, but never really look at the true cost of what that is. And whether that's on a macro level when it comes to Canadian freedoms that we hold, or on an individual level of the freedoms and responsibilities and accountability we have, and to our families, to our employer, and to our community. But it's a conversation that isn't had enough, and a reflection that isn't done nearly as often.
Yeah, I think society's too soft to have that conversation on. Love the idea of accountability, all aspects of your life. thought process of everything that I have control of is my responsibility. You can take blame for things that maybe you don't necessarily need to take blame for, but you can take accountability and ownership of things that really truly were in your control, and you just put it on somebody else. And that's such a thing in society now, is the blame game. Nobody takes accountability and responsibility for their actions, and especially their inaction. That's probably the biggest one, I think, is we've gotten comfortable as a society to allow the elitists, to allow people that claim themselves to be a boss, to be a leader, to be somebody that's higher than us. I will say that also highlights something that I struggle with in society, is the idea of equality. This is probably going to be quite a hot take here, but I don't think men and women are equal. I don't think men and men are equal. I don't think women and women are equal. How can we tell people, and going back to the religious component, if you are in that spectrum, that you believe in God, you believe in a human's value, there's people that can lift heavier weights than me. There's people who look different than me. There's people taller than me. There's people shorter than me. So I think that's a complete farce that we need to strive for equality as a collective when we're not even equal as an individual.
And I unpack that and I've debated people on this before, and I do it in a very comical, relaxed sort of way. Is it's easy to think of equality when you're in a sphere of perfection. The easiest example is the Titanic, right? You don't have enough life rafts. What do? And I know what I would do, right? I would hug my wife and my daughter, and I put them on a life raft. Now, I'm going to tell you something. I'm going to be honest here. I know exactly what you and I would do. Okay. We would say goodbye to our wives. Now we don't know that the ship takes 3 hours to sink. We don't know that, but we can see by its trajectory, we got a little bit of time. So first thing we do, we hit up the bar, right? Top shelf stuff. It's going down anyway, right? And then we grab the band, and you know what we do? We build a raft, because we look at opportunity, and there's a lot of stuff that's floatable there, right? And then when we go buy our beautiful wives on those life rafts, and we have the full band and a full bar, we pick them up and we take them on our raft. But the point is that they're on the life rafts first, because as a sacrificial person, I will say this, I don't have the same value as a Canadian when I served in the Canadian Armed Forces. The Canadian has more value than me because soldiers put their lives on the line, right? Members of the Canadian Armed Forces put their lives on the line. Now, I like to think that they would all do that. Thankfully, we aren't in that situation anymore, right? But I'd like to believe that every person that signs up to serve this country would pay the ultimate sacrifice. And using that as our basis, through deductive reasoning, a member of the Canadian Armed Forces would have less value than a Canadian, because you're putting them up first. Those are the tough conversations to have. But when you sit down and you unpack it and you break it down, I would put my wife and my daughter on that life raft first, because you're in an imperfect environment. Of course, my wife can mow the lawn. She can do a lot of the same things I can. There's things that she can do that I can't do. There's things that I can do that she can't do, but we complement one another and we grow together. Right? That's what's important. But to take these militant, really divisive positions of equality, I think is disingenuous to human nature as a whole and what we've seen and where we're going.
I think that boils it down for me exactly what it is. It's human nature. It's so much bigger than you wanting to get recognition for not doing much. And I think that's actually the root of the evil of some of these positions that these people have, and these buzzwords that they come out with, is people want to be validated without putting in effort.
Yeah. And you see that with advocacy. You see that, and this isn't to offend anybody, but you see that with t-shirts, bracelets, and even Facebook backgrounds around, right? That's easy, right? That's easy. Going and getting up early to go help out at your food bank, that's difficult. And I think, again, we want to be heroes in our own story, and we want other people's approval. And so a lot of people, not everybody, but a lot of people are advocates for things in the most rudimentary ways that take very little discipline, effort, and responsibility. And for me as an individual, I'm not like that. I want to look at the big issues facing my community. I want to take them head on. I want to get my hands dirty, because for me, if there's a cost, usually the reward is there. If there's no cost, then the value of the reward normally goes down.
I love that perspective. I think it's fantastic. I think your position, just having known you for all the years and talking to you today, you could talk about the military experience and what the overarching entity was. And I love the Peter Pan reference. That's super cool. It is, I think, using that experience has shaped you into the way you are. You know, your faith has shaped you into how you do things. And you've seen it through selfless acts, whether the military showed you how to do that. You've now reframed it in an entrepreneurial way, with a giving back mindset, a community mindset, a charity mindset. And that's super important. And I think that's really a framework for anybody in life is if you're stuck, or if you don't know what to do, or you don't align with something, or you're not part of a community or a tribe or anything, is you just got to move. You got to get your hands dirty, as you said.
It is a tapestry. It is a tapestry. I feel grateful and fortunate. I've worked with some of the greatest leaders in the Canadian Armed Forces. I'm still friends with now. I have a couch everywhere to sleep on in Canada. I've traveled all over the world. I've had great opportunity and have used that. I've been a manager. I've been a leader. I've been a worker. And all those things have forged me who I am. I think the greatest thing that I think I've done personally, if I can boast, is always trying to build a life you never need a vacation from. And that's the one thing that through comfort and discomfort, but just enjoying life to the fullest, being adventurous, taking antiquated risk, and just enjoying it because you only have one ride.
Do you think you've accomplished that up to this point?
I think if I died, I don't have any regrets. If I died tomorrow, I don't have any regrets. There's a lot of things that I still want to do. Of course, when I was a leader in the Canadian Armed Forces and the RCAF, I would tell the younger generation, come in, do everything that you want to do. Like if you want to join the rifle team, join if you want to do the 9 Megan March, do that. Get involved, because I find at least a lot of the new people coming in would be posted maybe to an area they were unfamiliar with or something they didn't like, and they'd feel disgruntled and they'd lack that connection and they would feel lost. And it's like, go, you are the hero in your story, right? Go do something that makes you uncomfortable. Go do something. One of the complaints in Cold Lake from a lot of the younger males were that there was a lack of, female companionship. And I said, well, why don't you go to the local coffee shop? They have paint night. I'm like, I'm not painting. I said, well, enjoy playing Call of Duty alone then, right? Like, go to paint night. Like, look, it's paint night.
Go get your teeth cleaned and talk to the dental hygienist.
Yeah, right.
Like, go to where the women are.
Yeah, like go do, and like you said, movement. Go do something, right?
Exactly.
I don't know what the solution is to motivate really a generation of, and obviously I'm generalizing, but an example, people would see and like, oh man, that guy sea-doos to work, right? Like, how did he do that? And my entrepreneurial spirit was contagious. It's no coincidence that people in the Canadian Armed Forces that were around me started opening their own businesses. And many of them, I know a lot of military members now that have their own business. And I'm not saying it all came from me. I'm just saying that as individuals, as you engage in success and positivity, people gravitate towards that. And they're like, well, what's that person doing? And I did that. A lot of people don't know Wicked Water Sport Rentals would not have been because of some powerful women that were mentors of mine. And I give them kudos for, I try not to be the smartest person in the room. I try to surround myself with people that are smarter than me, people that have more experience than me, and take things from their toolbox that I can apply. Like, why wouldn't I do that? And it's been to my benefit. And I've thanked them. But yeah, I think getting uncomfortable and doing, like you were mentioning before, like the power of yes.
To unpack that a little bit, I think I know what the solution is. Is it actually the solution? Obviously, no one will ever know, but we need to stop looking at everything as a results base. I would be a firm believer, and you could probably expand on this, is your experience in the military gave you a foundational discipline of selflessness. And I'm not saying everyone go join the military and your life will be fixed. That's not what I'm getting at. I'm getting at the idea that don't look at everything from the receiving has to be greater than my input. That's what everything is driven down to. Oh, I need to get 6 packs within 6 weeks. I need to get on a plan. I need to lose 20 pounds in 10 days. So I'm going to go on a shake diet. All of these falsities that don't reward the effort. And a great example for me is I love to cook. I love good food. Me and you align on this. We're always posting pictures of the food we cook and eat online. We're a bunch of old ass men just doing simple shit.
That's right.
But people will look at that and say, well, it would be more cost effective for you to go eat at Chipotle.
Right.
And it's like, sure, that could be true, but you're assuming that I'm only looking at cooking as a dollars and cents. When I'm in the kitchen, I'm learning a new skill.
Right.
I'm learning discipline. I go in the zen when I'm in the kitchen. It's really my meditation. Yeah, I go into the zone. I don't hear my daughter.
Music when you cook?
I don't. I listen to podcasts. I listen to material that is going to grow me. And
I listen to the cultural music of the food I'm making.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. I love that. And that also is awareness. And I think that is an overarching result of anything we do that's not easy. I've discovered cold plunges. I get into cold water every day.
I see that.
I get into cold water every day.
Yes.
Whether it's a cold shower or in the wintertime, I'll go into frozen lakes. I found that through a friend of mine. He's friends with Rod, the person that we were partying with when we first met. Yeah. And at first it was, I wanted to go in the cold water because I hear it has recovering properties and I hear it, it's really good for you. And I'm like, fantastic. And then you do it and you realize I'm out in nature. I'm getting fresh air. I'm training my mind to do things I don't want to do. And now I can utilize this new tool in my tool belt to leverage in any aspect of my life.
Yes.
I don't want to go to work.
Right.
But now I go to work with a smile on my face, because when I can get into freezing cold water, my drive to work or the stresses that I'm dealing with at work, like I get a disgruntled person on the phone, that's not the hardest thing I'm going to deal with today.
That's right.
I've already accomplished the biggest mountain that I'm going to have to face today. So now the rest of the day is a breeze.
Yes.
Now, when I drive home from work and I get a flat tire, yeah, it sucks. But man, I spent 3 minutes in 0-degree water in the morning. What the hell is a flat tire? Right. And that's the problem, is people equate everything they do to either dollars and cents or time versus reward.
And people want things quick. They don't see.
Exactly. Because
that recovery isn't going to come the first time you jump in that cold bath.
Correct.
It comes over the discipline and the time and the effort that you put in.
And that's everything, literally everything. Anything you do that has a long-term goal, you need to be in it for the long run.
100%. And we deal with it with my company, the Property Consulting. We deal with investors all the time. Real quick, I learned to cook because I was a single dad and I wanted to make good, healthy, quality food for my daughter. That was the motivation. Where these get-rich-quick schemes come from, right? Or the ab vibrators and all these gimmicks, instead of hard work, discipline, and time. And even from a cooking perspective, time is one of the most amazing ingredients. You hear about stocks and soups and all these different things that take this incredible amount of time, because that time changes the structure of that food. There's a lesson there that when you extrapolate, that you can add to your life.
I agree. And that's probably the biggest message that I try to put in my marriage, in my lessons to my daughter, my business partners, and my side business. And even at work, I try to look at things in the long haul. I look at things as a bigger overarching picture rather than solving something very small, immediate. Mind you, those battles have to be had. Have to. No doubt about it, especially in business. But I think that's the solution today, is to teach kids, go mow lawns for $20 an hour. Well, what does that teach me? Well, you're likely going to learn how to fix shit. You're likely going to learn how to greet people. You're likely going to learn how to mow grass. So you're going to learn
so much stuff. People only see value in money and not in the lesson.
And that's the thing, is that's the problem today, is I think everyone looks at everything like that, every aspect of their life, where they spend their money, how they earn an income, relationships. She didn't sleep with me on the first date. Fuck that girl. Like, what are you talking about? Learn to talk to a woman first. Why don't you learn to do that first? Why don't you learn these skills? Because everything is so easy nowadays.
And you bring up 2 points there that are really important. One is the idol of happiness. I don't bow at the pillar of happiness. Happiness to me is actually low level. Joy is more important, because joy, again, is that investment, that long term. And even finding joy, and there were days that I'd have to get up early in the military, or I'd have to do something, but I'd be thinking, well, what's the cause? What's the end game? Okay, well, I'm growing as an individual. I'm protecting my country. I'm in charge of these people and trying to make their lives better. All these different things, right? So that's where joy comes in. Happiness, I can take a pill. I can drink some whiskey. I feel happy. Joy is finding that in really those areas of discomfort, but there's still joy there, right? I think that's really an important lesson. But also is, again, like looking at the long-term goals. And it's important to have goals, short-term goals and long-term goals. But I just feel people want stuff without any discipline or effort to attain it. And then when you are successful or you have those things, sometimes people make the argument that it was done through some malicious effort, right? Or that there wasn't discipline to attain it, because they don't see that. They just see the trips, or they just see.
Lucky, Ray.
Yeah.
You're so lucky. You're so lucky.
You're so lucky.
It just fell in your lap.
Yeah.
So lucky.
Oh man. If they just saw how many times I was unlucky. Oh man, it's so true. It's so true. But no, and I think this is a great vessel, your podcast. And I love the title of really talking about those issues and how they all connect, in the hopes of people maybe just taking something small away from it and applying it to their life.
Yeah, I love that. I love challenging people's status quo too, because I think the idea of not being comfortable makes people uncomfortable.
Right.
And that's what I love. Because I can absolutely attest that the greatest moments I've had with my daughter were some of the hardest moments. The most solidifying moments in my marriage were fucking hard. The best victories I had with my business were the biggest issues I had to overcome.
What was the motivating factor for you to start your podcast?
This podcast was born out of feedback I got from a lot of people. I've always been an opinionated person, and I've had very traditional views to things that I've never been afraid to voice them, even to a detriment. It's definitely affected me negatively to a degree, and I've been kicked in my shin under a table multiple times by my wife. But for me, the biggest motivating factor was this is one of the most authentic mediums to get a message across. And I don't want to gain notoriety from this per se. I hope people will gain value. And I think that goes back to our upbringing when we talk about our great grandparents and we talk about having gratitude towards these life experiences and perspective to the privileges that we have in today's modern society. Is if somebody can get anything out of this and even try something. If I'm episode 100 into this podcast and somebody tries a cold shower because of it, fucking awesome.
Yes.
Love that. And that's all I want is I want people to become more open-minded and also, and you actually use the term, is become a better critical thinker. Don't be afraid to question something that in the past you thought was true.
Yes.
I don't like the terminology, your truth.
I'm adamantly opposed to that.
Yes.
Adamantly opposed to that. Absolutely.
There's the truth.
That's
and then there's your position, your propositions, your opinions, whatever it is. But the truth is these factual words, this vocabulary that is unwavering. But there's, for whatever reason, a war on words these days is to
like that one. When somebody says that to me, when I hear that, it's like, it doesn't matter what you say. This is it. And then you have to reflect yourself of if it's worth even engaging that individual. I think having the positivity and gratitude and servanthood, that was the other one. When that person hits that crossroad, I hope I've put myself in a position where that person feels comfortable enough to come and talk to me and seek my counsel. Because I know people have, for me, have inspired me where I'm able to go to them when I hit a real rough patch. Socrates talked about that. They're like, why do you always talk to the elders? And he says, like, planning for somebody going on a trip, they're on a trip of age, right? And I can go and connect with them to see the path that I'll be on. You know? And again, that's rooted in humility and that's rooted in truth, right? And it's so important. But these ideas, like you were saying, are being lost, I think.
I don't think they're being lost. I think there's a deliberate battle to eliminate them from society. I don't know if you know who Andrew Tate is. He's pretty popular on a lot.
I'm aware of Andrew Tate, yeah.
Pretty polarizing opinions. And do I agree with everything he says? Certainly not. I think he says it in a manner that gets him clicks and notoriety and ad revenue or whatever you want to call it. But I think his core message is rooted in uncomfortable truth.
Right.
It's rooted in the uncomfortable truth, not someone's uncomfortable truth.
Yes.
Is there's no denying the absolute fact that if you get your life in order and you are a physical specimen, that you will garner respect.
Yes.
Period. End of story. Like that's not a false statement. And anybody who thinks it is, in my mind, is likely a weak individual. Not necessarily weak in what they can lift, but I'm talking maybe a person that might not have self-confidence. Maybe somebody who hasn't really experienced gratitude in a level that it makes them have humility. Is somebody who says, take care of a woman, or don't open a door for a woman at a grocery store. That's insulting to her honor or some dumb shit. Like, what are you talking about? That people are getting rid of the charitable aspect of life. And I truly believe there's a deliberate agenda by whoever you want to call it to make people soft and weak so that they're easily controlled.
Yeah, that argument is certainly there. You know, and there's another line that says there's no solutions to problems, only trade-offs. And the question is what are those trade-offs when we lose those values in our society? What are the trade-offs?
The trade-off is safety and freedom.
Right.
You cannot make a person more safe without infringing on freedom. That's an inevitable. Those things work in conjunction with each other, but they are, I don't know the mathematical term here, but they work in difference with each other.
Right.
Is if I tell you that I want to make your life more safe, let's use the obvious thing, COVID-19. I'm a government. I want to protect you. I know what's in your best interest. So the way I'm going to make you more safe is to destroy your freedom, to destroy your freedom of choice, destroy your freedom to work, to move, to travel within your country, things that are in our Bill of Rights.
Yeah. And that was definitely a divisive and still continues to be divisive.
They were talking about it the other day.
Yeah.
There was the health minister of Canada. I think it was 2 days ago.
Yeah, I saw that.
The Omicron variants.
Yes.
You're done.
And I know in the military, it was very divisive. Right. And not to get too political or take sides. I remember when I joined basic training, I was in a lineup of people. We had to get a ton of vaccinations. I have a vaccination book and we had to get a ton of, and you'd laugh at the guys that passed out. And there's like 100 of us and there's people on both sides and you're on a conveyor belt getting needles. And regardless of how one feels about COVID or the vaccine or pharmaceuticals, or regardless of all of that, I think if anyone was honest, at least for myself, when I got my COVID shot for the military, I had to deploy up north. I didn't feel the same way as getting the other vaccines. I had doubt in my mind. And the question is where does that doubt come from? People will say it could come from misinformation, it could come from media, it could come from whatever. But I think, and I'm a critical thinker. I remember riding this bus and people are in suits and we're going and we're the first group. And I remember thinking critically where I'm just like, why do I feel this way? Why am I sitting on this bus? There's a mistrust there, right? And obviously, I think it was the politicization of it, right? And I think everything's being politicized now, from who you date to the food you eat to the vehicle that you drive, right? And when I was growing up, everything wasn't politicized. The politicization of things just didn't really occur. And now everything's politicized. And so I went and I saw it as a servant, as an act of servanthood, because I needed it to deploy. We were going up north to Inuvik, and I was like Roto Zero or whatever to get the vaccine. And I had friends that lost their job in the military that refused to get it. And I have friends that are pro and against, and I love both of them. And I listen to both of them, and I have my own opinion on it.
That's because you value them as a human being. You don't,
That's right.
You don't value their opinions and beliefs.
That's right.
And that is rooted in exactly that. There's a ringing phrase that came up shortly after the pandemic. A friend of mine, Trevor Turnbull, said, I don't know if he's the originator of it, but it says, rising tides raise all boats. Meaning no matter the size of the boat, no matter if you're new, old, if you're a lobster fisherman or a cruise ship, the tide will raise you the same.
That's a good one.
I love it. And I think he had a completely different message when saying it. He talked more about the business aspect of it, where we don't need to look at it where, oh, well, Ray owns a water sport business, so I can't exist in Cold Lake. It's like, no, you can have multiple businesses of the same origin in the same place. That
competitiveness is great.
Exactly.
Keeps people's knife sharp.
But where I'll use that in terms of talking about the pandemic is, why can't we as a society not necessarily agree to disagree, but just live in indifference? Why can't me and you have completely different positions on something and yet be given the same rewards or the same gifts of modern society?
And I think the answer to that is, we're all spiritual beings and we want to serve something. We want to serve it in the right way. We want to be on the right side and the hero of our story. And the easiest way to do that is to join a group, whatever group that is, that we reside there, which is very religious. It's a very religious position to take. And I mean, there's a ridiculous amount of denominations because of that divisiveness, right? So that's the reason why. And I think it's easy to reside in those clubs of groupthink, right? That's the easy path. The hard path is to try to understand and to have empathy and to be okay with being in disagreement, and being okay with that, to say, I have lots of friends that aren't Christians, and I have lots of friends that have differing opinions of me, but I love them and I try to learn from them. I like to break bread with them, but I think that's harder.
It is. And that goes back to where I truly believe the issue was, is you referenced the 1960s earlier with civil rights movements, is you really had two groups of people. You really had people that were of the traditional mindset, the older men and women that were like, no, Black people shouldn't drink out of the same fountain and all this stuff. And they had people that said, absolutely not. Now you have society broken up into all these really small groups that align with, in my opinion, some fictitious issues that they just get married to out of nothing. So now you're not fighting liberals or conservatives. People align with hundreds of different, very small niche groups. And so government can control them, because it's a lot harder to control 50% of the men in a country.
Yeah. And I would agree that 98% of their beliefs are aligned. It's these little things. And then people get so angry and so attached to them. And I'm like, well, what about the other 98%?
Because we do a good job of making them the enemy.
Yes.
We do a great job.
Because then we are the good hero in our story.
You have the leader of the free world in the United States, in Joe Biden, saying this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated. Before this podcast, we talked about election interference, and we're not going to get into that, but he literally said that the people that are pro-vaccination immediately make the unvaccinated enemy number one.
Yeah.
It's not even a question.
And social media, you saw that on social media from political leaders too, is taking people in groups and giving them labels, instead of, from their humanity, understanding that we are complex people, right? We have complex ideas. We have our stories, and they could be anecdotal stories of experience and things like this. But generally speaking, like I said, if you engage in your community and you go to a barbecue, you see that the majority of us, regardless of what media and politicians say, we're quite united when we want to be. And I think that's the most important thing to remember, and to pull back when we feel that fire in our belly because there's a topic that's really important to us and that we're passionate about, probably because of an experience that we had, is to just take a minute and dial back and try to understand the other person's perspective and be okay with the fact that it might not be yours. right? And yours could change. Maybe it changes over time. We've seen that. Oh my goodness, have we seen that? Have we ever seen in this country people change their minds about so many different things?
Which is a great thing. I don't know why that's considered a negative thing. I think becoming more aware of yourself and what aligns with you and growing.
Yes.
When I was 12 years old, I don't have the same views as I have. Even if you were to throw me in a fucking box,
Right.
and I never watched the news, I never knew what politics was, my values and my positions are going to change.
100%.
Life is going to push you in different directions.
When I was going to care about candy, then I got a little older, I care about girls. Right.
You care about calcium pills, so you have the fucking arthritis. Like you're going to change.
I forgot the grocery bags. Oh man, how did I forget those?
Yeah, I'm going to become more stubborn. I'm going to become more,
Oh.
grumpy old man syndrome, whatever you want to call it. That's not a bad thing. You see it so much, all these smear campaigns. I remember during the election here, Danielle Smith in Alberta, somebody brought up a radio interview of her like 8 years ago.
You're right.
And it's like, who gives a shit?
The Canadian Armed Forces is ripe with that.
But that's the problem. Is it's so ridiculous because deep down inside, when you have a debate or an online keyboard war or whatever you want to call it, the goal in the back of your head is I'm going to sway this person from having ridiculous thought processes. Whereas if you go into that conversation of this person is valuable because they fucking exist, and just by existing, you bring value as a human being, when you go into it with that, I believe the words in your paragraphs are going to change. The tone in your conversation is going to change.
You also have to realize, is it the battlefield I want to go into? For me, I found I don't know if I can honestly say I've changed anyone's opinion on social media. So my social media, I was running for city council 2 years ago. I removed all my divisive political shares, like news articles and stuff. I removed that because I found that people would presume something based on the sharing. Now, maybe I was for it, maybe I wasn't against it. And I had to be careful as a member of the Canadian Armed Forces. I could share something that was on newsfeed, but it was the comment that they could reprimand me for. Right. And so what I would do is I'd see the other comments. I just put it there and see what kind of people were talking about. So when it comes from a social media standpoint, I think from my own personal opinion, it's not a battlefield I want to be involved with. This is different. And talking about ideas with people that I value with and that I can learn from, and maybe there's something that I don't know, and then my views on things have changed. I see more value as an individual and from a collective perspective than engaging with people that I don't know, and that there's probably little likelihood that I can convince about divisive issues. It's different from an entrepreneurial perspective. I get hit up all the time for advice and things like this. And again, I found entrepreneurs to be very, very giving in their failures, right? Which is beautiful. But from the divisive hot topics, I stay clear from very small tidbits like comments and stuff. And because as soon as you put a long comment on social media, no one's reading. As soon as they hit read more and it goes, they're like, no, that's an essay, not doing it. But it could be well formulated. It could make all the points only if someone reads it.
That goes back to the point where people want things immediately.
They want things immediately.
If I don't agree with the first 3 sentences of your story, I'm not going to align with it, so I don't care. It's
a weird dichotomy because the podcast is picking up because people want these long-form conversations, but only in audible or visual form, not in written form.
Better connection.
Yeah.
There's more connection. They're going to hear the tonality of our voice. They're going to see the expression on our face. They're going to hear our real world experience. Mm-hmm. It's different. It's way more human.
Well, I've read books in which I can get those things too. Mm-hmm. I just find reading is gone out, right? Like reading books, sitting down, reading books. I know people that are huge readers. I used to be a huge reader when I was at university. I'm not so much. I like podcasts. I like listening. And again, I'm one of these people because it's easier. I can do other things while doing it. Driving and all. I can't read a book while driving, but I can listen to this.
Yeah, I think that's part of it too. I truly believe, and I know for me, it's been the absolute truth where it's just a more personal connection. Is I like people's voices. I mean, is it edited and could it be real and the voice version of an Instagram filter of a girl? Possibly, certainly, but I enjoy the topics.
Yes.
I enjoy listening to real world stuff. I don't listen to podcasts that talk about anime. Right. I don't listen to podcasts that talk about forestry in British Columbia. As much as I have respect for that industry, it just doesn't align with me. But there's people that will. People that are maybe living in Prince George will listen to something like that because it's real. A guy talking about cutting down a 300-foot tree and being part of his industry or having a close call, it's polarizing. People be like, wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that people are not the same.
Yeah.
But at the same time, for me, this medium, the conversation today, and my goal with this venture is to call a spade a spade. We have problems in society, and I can promise you the people that are telling you from a leadership standpoint what our problems are have no fucking idea what they're talking about because they have an agenda. And that goes for anything. Your CEO at your job has an agenda. They may not have your best interests at heart, but getting back to the rudimentary aspect of it, of going to work with good perspective, a smile on your face, discipline, treating your job like you treat your house, that is a reflection of how you do everything in your life. And if you can clean that up, and if you can get better at just the fucking basics in life and have difficult conversations and be willing to talk to your neighbors and your business partners or people that you want to learn more from, go there and don't be afraid of criticism. More often than not, you're going to get the answer you want. Are you going to strike out at times? Certainly. You're going to meet people that don't fucking like you. You're going to meet people that think the questions you ask are dumb. It is what it is. But more often than not, if you play the odds and you're a mathematical person, you're going to get at least a tidbit of information that will help you more than it will hurt you.
Yes.
And that's what I think is lost. And that's my goal with this is I want to bring anybody and everybody who's willing to sit down. I don't give a shit if a transgender person wants to sit in the chair you're sitting in. I want to unpack that. Right. What made you go down this road? Where do you get value from this? I want to talk to people of religion. I want to talk to men, women, younger children, a 12-year-old Candace that wants to talk about putting M&Ms in popcorn, which is a fucking brilliant idea. But
yeah, they're good.
And that's the whole purpose of it. And that's what podcasting, the ones that I listen to, have done for me. So by me doing this, I'm regurgitating all that valuable information that I've received, that I've employed in my life, that I am not afraid to go on a difficult run or do hard workouts or have difficult conversations. I no longer want that to be looked at in a negative fashion. And the key is to have somebody sitting across from you or on the computer screen, maybe in a different area, be willing to have that conversation. And that is what's missing. It happens so much. I mean, my God, even in workplaces now, you can't give people bad criticism. You can get fucking reprimanded.
You have to be careful what you say too, because somebody else could take offense to a conversation and they're not even a part of it.
That's completely fucking ridiculous. Is how am I supposed to know where your feelings lie when my criticisms are absolutely justified? And I can show you with objectionable results that you suck as a salesperson, or that, you were an asshole to this person on the phone. I can't call that out as a business owner or a coworker. That's fucking crazy. That makes absolutely no sense. And I'm finding more and more with structured entities like the military, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm sure it's worse now, but back when things made a little bit more sense, when there was a bit more of an unmodern approach to how these things are run, is you were allowed to do that. You were allowed to call a spade a spade. You were allowed to tell someone who's not putting in the same effort. And that goes back to that equality statement I made, is no two persons are the same. So how the fuck can all men and all women be created equal, paid equal, treated equal? It makes no sense.
Yeah, resiliency is really, really important. But you spoke about something that's a good segue, because I brought you a gift today that kind of goes to the theme of your vision with your podcast. But I got a jacket that says Soldier On it, and my company logo, Wicked Water Sport Rentals. But Soldier On is a program that provides creative activities and sports to ill and injured soldiers. In the Air Force, we've got coins that you get from every unit. So if at my house, I have all the coins from the units I was part of, and then coins that were given to me from the Marines or members of the Navy in Florida. And they're oftentimes given as gifts. And the idea of the military coin, and I might get this wrong, but I believe it's true, is I think it started with the Royal Air Force, where a pilot was a POW and got away. And it was his coin that saved him from being attacked as an enemy. And he showed the coin. And so I brought you a Soldier On coin, and you shake someone's hand, you give them the coin. And awesome. So I just want to bring you that today, because the Soldier On program is dedicated to providing wellness to ill and injured soldiers. And I think your vision of your podcast to have uncomfortable conversations in the search of truth for the betterment of people aligns with that. So
thank you so much. And I love the soldiering on aspect of it, because it's so true in today's society. When you start something or go on a new venture and you meet your first big mountain, your first level of adversity, I think more often than not, people quit. And I think that's when people's mettle is tested. I think when you choose to go through that fire regardless, and you're confident in your convictions, which will be the title of this episode, it's very important. And that's a metaphor for life in general. So before we end this, is there anything you want to plug? I know you're here with your business partner. Thank you so much for being here today and sitting very patiently.
I'd love to. Yeah. So if you're ever in the Cold Lake area, come and visit Wicked Water Sport Rentals. We rent out paddle boards, paddle boats, kayaks, and kids kayaks, and boat rentals from the Cold Lake Marina. Our non-motorized rentals are located on Kinnessoo Beach in our beautiful little trailer. run by, I call the Beach Boys. They're great. The other company, which we're really excited to be moving into the Edmonton sphere of real estate, is the Property Consulting Group. Property Consulting Group, we just acquired the property management division of Coldwell Banker in Cold Lake. And the fact that they trusted us enough to acquire their clients was humbling and exciting and adventurous. And we hope to provide the same great customer service that Coldwell did in Cold Lake. But now owning some real estate in Edmonton and moving a branch of the Property Consulting Group into Edmonton is really exciting. And the way quickly that we do property management that may be a little bit different is we utilize advanced technologies, namely our app, when it comes to our investors. So we have investors in Hong Kong, we have investors in South Africa.
You have properties there or just?
No, those are investors that own properties in the Cold Lake, Lakeland area. And they can open up the portal on the website to look at what's happening with their investment property. And tenants that are with us, if they have a maintenance issue, they open up the app and they could say, I've got a leak, and they can provide a picture or a video, and it goes right to our vendor service. And we see that, and everything's tracked in a way to hold us accountable as a company, to hold owners accountable that they're providing good housing, and also for tenants accountability to raise their value as a tenant, which is so important now with the housing crisis in Canada, to raise their value as a tenant, to try to keep housing affordable. We're not a greedy company. We have a rule: if you're greedy, you lose money. That's kind of a rule that we have. And providing freedom.
Back to that slow, sustainable growth over time.
Yes.
You can't be greedy and look at, I need profit margins in dollars and cents monthly. It's long-term.
It's long-term. And especially in a rural community, reputation's everything. And so we want to have the reputation of a company where we're providing ethical and transparent management services. And I think we've done that. And I think technology's allowed us to move into that space a little bit better. We don't have the overhead as most companies do. Like, we don't have an office. We don't have a Wi-Fi bill and property taxes and water and all this. One of our pillars for our company is freedom for the owner, investor to be able to look at the management of his company and still enjoy his life. Freedom from the tenant to know that maintenance issues and stuff are going to be taken care of, that they can pay rent on the app. So they have the freedom of that. And freedom for my partner and I to continue to grow our company in a manageable way where we can still afford the time needed to our families and to the charitable means that we're involved with in our community. So that's really, really important to us. So those are my plugs.
I appreciate that, man. Well, this has been a great conversation. It went down paths I didn't think were going to happen, unscripted. For anybody who doesn't believe it, there's no scripts on this.
No script. No, nothing.
And I appreciate the gift, man. That's so personable. And I'm going to cherish this for sure. And it'll live on this desk for future episodes.
I wish you all the success.
I appreciate it.
I hope you invite me back,
yes, sir. Yes.
Next year and see where we are in our trajectory and growth. And to everybody listening, I really hope that you heard value in what we spoke about and continue to subscribe. And I know you have me as a listener for life.
Well, that's it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening to the Unmodern podcast. If you like what you heard and want to hear more, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Also, like and follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Unmodern Podcast. Do you have suggestions for future guests, or if you're interested in being a guest yourself, please visit unmodernpodcast.com. Thank you again, and we'll see you in the next episode.